Today we're going to be replacing the radiator in a 2007 Saturn Vue all-wheel drive. So when dealing with any liquids in the car, disconnect the negative terminal of the battery. On this car it's an 8mm. The next step, we want to drain the coolant. Underneath the car there's a coolant drain plug right here. It's the little plastic tap on the end. Just rotate that to the left and coolant will start leaving the car. Once you loosen it, a little dribble will come out. Next, go to the overflow and remove the cap. This will allow the coolant to escape the system. If your coolant is contaminated, dirty or anything else, recycle it. If you're not sure, you can buy coolant test it kits for about $2 from Walmart. If your coolant's good, make sure you're using a nice clean drain pan here so you can refill it later. While the coolant's draining, we can start removing some bolts here for this front bumper section and the headlights. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 10mm bolts to remove. So with the 6 bolts now removed, we want to continue to remove this front fascia. With the lights unbolted, that's just the end 2 bolts there. Just grab the light and move it this way, and that will unhook it from the bumper right there, and there's another one right here, and then you should be able to just pull it free. Now the headlight's pulled free, there's just 3 connections you need to remove on each side of the car, and there's just a little toggle on the side there and on the front there, and you can remove those from the lights themselves. Once the headlights are removed, just place them to one side. So when we're replacing the radiator, there's a few things we may need. If you're not reusing your coolant, you will need some new coolant. Depending on your car, you might have Dexcool or something like that. For the Saturn Vue, it's Dexcool. I bought the concentrated, so we're going to mix them with distilled water. You get more value for money that way. Need some simple sockets and wrenches, and also a radiator. Now, I will mention one thing. Depending on why your radiator went out, say your coolant is contaminated, you will need to do a complete flush. That's flushing the heater core, everything of coolant before you reinstall the radiator. If the radiator just had a leak or start working for whatever reason, then we can just drain the coolant normally. You don't need to do a super flush or clean or anything like that, and just drop the new radiator in. So at the front of the car, coming under the wheel arch here, we have a couple of these tabs here. What you do, just insert a flathead screwdriver between the front and the back of it and wiggle side to side, and that will get the first piece out. So you can grab the first piece, pull it out, continue with your screwdriver behind the second one, and then it's removed. Do for the same for 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and that should remove this cover so you can access the bolt holding this onto the car. And now do the same for the other side. Come in underneath the front of the car. There's 3 more little plugs there, and 1 there, and 1 there, and again on the other side 1 there. They need to be removed as well. Now just move the panel backwards. You can see the bolt right here. I've put the socket on, 10mm. That just holds it all together. There's 1 on each side. You can turn the steering wheel to move the tyre out of your way if you wish to do so. With the bolt removed, place it to one side and do the other side of the car. Now with both those bolts removed, just grab the trim here and give it a little tug. Be really mindful because it connects with many plastic toggles all the way around and up. You can push down on this corner here on the front of the car, and that should dislodge the clips over here too. Again, just be really careful, it should slot out. Now we've pulled the side off slightly and the front, we can access the connector for the fog lights. There's 1 on each side. Alternatively, you can crawl under the car and disconnect it first, it doesn't really matter. There's just 2 tabs, 1 on each side. Just pull them both out and it should disconnect. So the front you can just remove now, set it aside. You should be left with something like that, which is plenty of room to be replacing our radiator now. One thing I'm going to stress, I'll just mention it one time, is that the radiator is right next to the condenser for the AC system. Now the AC system, none of the lines are really flexible with rubber like the radiator is. So you have to be really careful about undoing the transmission inlet and outlet on the radiator, and also when you're working near to the condenser for the AC. So just be mindful of that. So next we're going to disconnect some coolant lines to the radiator. Just need some pliers there to pinch these two together so that coolant line can pop off. And there's also another one on the opposite bottom corner for the driver's side, which is right here. So again, just pinch this together and pull it back away from the radiator. So there's one, we'll just push that away, just like that. And the second one down at the bottom, just like that. There might be a little spillage just because you've drained the radiator coolant system, but these pipes still have coolant in, so you will get a little spill. Have a drain pan ready for that. We're just going to undo two 10mm bolts now, one right here and one right here. This brackets the condenser, radiator and fan module all together to the body of the car. There's two more underneath, but we're going to get those later. So just take the whole bracket and remove it out of the way. Now the top brackets are out of the way, we're going to remove these transmission cooler lines. There's one at the top and also one down here at the bottom. Right there. So with these we have to be really careful. The outer one is a 16mm, I believe, 5/8 inch, the silver bolt. However, if you try and remove this bolt by itself, the corner of the pipe here, the tube, will start bending, and that's the last thing we want. It has zero flex in there. So what we really need to do is keep this one steady and use a wrench on this large nut here. Use an adjustable wrench or something like that. So we're keeping the silver one steady with a wrench, and also another wrench we're removing and putting pressure on this outer one here. That should allow the rusty part right here to rotate while this keeps still. That's very important for disconnecting these transmission coolant lines. So when you take these lines out, just get a little tissue and hold it underneath, because a tiny bit of transmission fluid will just drop. You can poke it in the end or you just let it hang, it's really up to you, but there's not much there. Small tip: if you can't get access to these bolts because the frame's in the way, then you can remove this rubber dampener here, and that lets the whole assembly ride a little lower, so you can get your wrench in there a lot easier. So now both our coolant lines have been disconnected, both our transmission lines have been disconnected. We have to disconnect the fan module, which on the back, these two big fans here, we just need to disconnect that from the radiator. We wouldn't normally have to, but this whole metal sort of body bar is in here and we're not going to be able to slide it out otherwise. So there's two 8mm bolts holding the top of this fan module onto the radiator. They're right there. There's one of them on one side, but it is a lot easier to undo from the front here. So you can just get your wrench down here and take it right out. So now both of those 8mm bolts have been removed. You can see the fan module started separating from the radiator now. There's just two more tabs at the bottom that we need to remove. So now those two 8mm bolts have been removed, you can see the fans separating from the radiator there. All we have to do here is just pull up on the fan module. So get your hand in the top of this plastic here and just pull up. That will unseat the two tabs on either side at the bottom of the module. And from underneath the car you can see it just sits in the radiator right here. So it's pretty much the case of pulling it and that will release from this groove right here. So we're just going to leave the fan module where it is, but just push it backwards as far as you can so it's clear of the radiator. Okay, there's two plastic tabs connecting the condenser for the AC to the radiator, the piece we're trying to replace. If you pull this tab out here, it'll come out of this hole and slightly lift up on the condenser just so it's not sitting in the hole. I'm talking about 1mm, just so this is no longer in that hole. Do the same for the other side as well. Now the condenser is no longer really fully attached to the radiator, we're just going to push up on here and remove this rubber boot right here. So removing these rubber boots, it's not necessary, but it gives you a good bit of waggle room. Now you have that waggle room by removing those boots. Separating the condenser fully from the radiator is a lot more easier without damaging these AC components, because that's the last thing you want to do. So now they're totally separated, you can see right here, and also on the other side. We're just going to bring this over the top of the condenser. We can literally just grab the radiator and pull it out of the car. One thing I did do here was use a bungee cord on the condenser just to make sure it really doesn't move that much, because the last thing you want is any of these to sort of break off, which would be crazy. So yeah, just a bungee cord just to keep it to the body, something like that, so when you take the radiator out and slot the new one in, it's not going to move around that much. So before you put your replacement in, compare your parts, make sure they're identical. Now I got a junkyard one for $10. I figured, well, a new one was about $120, this is $10, you know, I could have 12 more goes at it. Got a lot of time right now, why not? I do recommend putting in a new one, that is up to you. But compare your parts, make sure they're identical, then assembly is pretty much the opposite of disassembly. Now the radiator is somewhat installed, I recommend refilling the coolant just to make sure if there's any leaks, you get them now while the bumper's off. One thing I mentioned is some transmission fluid lives in here, because this will also cools the transmission fluid. So you may need to top up your fluid level in the car, and that is located just down here, this dipstick here. So it's pretty much all back together now. When refilling the coolant, don't forget to purge it. I've got a video online how to do that. So it's basically getting all the air out of the system. Yeah, so we're just going to let it run for 15 minutes, get it up to operating temperatures, top up the transmission fluid, top up the coolant, and then we should be good to go. So I hope that helped you. Yeah, take care. Thanks for watching.